Hello and welcome to Cymera, Britain's only book festival celebrating science fiction, fantasy and horror writing. My name is Anne Landman and I'm the festival's founder and artistic director. Right about now, I'd hope to be welcoming you to beautiful Edinburgh, to our venue The Pleasance, for a weekend packed with events. Writing workshop, panels, readings, open mics, a quiz, a ceilidh, 2 plays. We had so much in store for you. Thank you for joining us online instead, to be part of our programme from the safety of your homes. We're very excited to still bring you a fantastic lineup of speakers. We'd ask you that you support our speakers, and there's many ways you can do that. You can buy their books or borrow them from the library. You can donate to them directly via their Patreon or Ko-fi. You will find the links for that below in the description. We encourage you to buy a ticket for our events, even the pre-recorded ones. All ticket money will go directly to our speakers. You can also donate to the festival, and all donations via the donation page will be split between our speakers, once we've covered our costs like the Zoom account. Thank you again for joining us in this brave new world of digital events. We hope you have a chance to check out all 33 of ours over the weekend. Please let us know what you think of them. Do get in touch via social media, the chat function in Zoom, or drop us an email on info@chimerafestival.co.uk. We'd love to hear from you. We hope you have a fantastic weekend, and we look forward to seeing you in person next year for Cymera 2021.
Okay, so thank you for joining us on the Modernising the Monster, or Modernising the Monstrous, I should say as well, panel. Monsters have been with us since time immemorial. From the earliest prehistoric cave paintings to Godzilla, monsters have haunted and perhaps reflected the human condition and the human experience. Perhaps horror maestro and filmmaker Guillermo del Toro said it best. I love monsters the way people worship holy images. To me, they really connect in a very fundamental way in my identity. And joining me to discuss all things monstrous, readers of horror and the strange will be no strangers to the guests I have on my panel today. So firstly, please welcome Tracy Fahey. Tracy is an Irish writer of Gothic fiction who cites Shirley Jackson, Angela Carter, and Donna Tartt among her influences. In 2017, her debut collection, The Heimlich Maneuver, was shortlisted for a British Fantasy Award, and her latest collection, New Music for Old Rituals, was released in 2018 by Black Shuck Books. So hi, Tracy. And next, we're graced by the presence of Jonathan Barnes, or J.S. Barnes, is his writer name. He's taught creative writing internationally for more than a decade, is a regular contributor to the Times Literary Supplement and the Literary Review. His recent novel, Dracula's Child, is out now from Titan Books, serves as a direct sequel to the classic novel. It's written in the same voice, in the same narrative style as the original. Publishers Weekly called the novel an adventurous and dread-inducing tale that will have readers hooked. And I'm happy to confirm that because I'm reading it at the moment. So welcome, Jonathan. Okay. And last but far from least, we have the talented John McNee. John is a Scottish writer of strange and disturbing horror stories. He is known for the books Prince of Nightmares, Grudge Punt, and Petroleum Precinct, as well as his short story collection, John McNee's Doom Cabaret, which was recently released. So guys, hi, welcome everyone. Welcome to the panel. Hello. Hi. So just to kick off, I'm going to start with a quote from Edgar Allan Poe. He's saying the scariest monsters are the ones that lurk within our souls. Do you agree with that? In the old days, we feared ghosts in old houses, dragons in caves, witches in the woods, very traditional ideas of horror, strange and terrible gods even. So really what I'm looking for is what kind of monsters haunt the world today. We start with Tracy.
I really like that quote, James, because it very much speaks to my own kind of thoughts about monstrosity, because I guess for me, I'm not so frightened by the kind of pulpy kind of monsters, the kind of universal monsters. I find incredibly scary are the kind of monstrous creations that arise from within us. So that whole idea of terror coming from the mundane, for me, is really uncanny, and all the more terrifying from it, because when kind of terror happens, when a monster emerges from a place that we consider to be safe or a place of refuge, and most terrifyingly of all, from within ourselves. I mean,
Yeah.
I think writers like Georgina Bruce and Priya Sharma and Carmen Maria Machado kind of really amplify that notion of the monster within really brilliantly. So yes, I concur.
Yes, it's a great quote. Yes. And John, what do you think? What kind of monsters haunt the world, or even yourself?
Well, I think monsters, there are, unless you're talking about man-eating tigers or something, there's no monsters are real. I don't want to spoil anyone's images and stuff. So they're all effectively coming from within us. They are all manifestations of our fears. Even the pulpier universal monsters, as Tracy talks about, are all representations of something within humanity. Today we are haunted in our pop culture, I think, by monsters that are more recognizably human. I'd quite like to see us try and veer away from that if we possibly could. I'm more interested in the less obviously human monsters, but I think those are the ones, the zombies, the serial killers, even our even the old-fashioned monsters that we have. We've sort of humanized them recently, and I think those are the ones that we typically see in our fiction today.
Definitely. I mean, for my money, you mentioned serial killers. That to me is my boogeyman. Nothing scares me more than a monster that could be real, even from a child to now. I can watch any amount of horror movies, but if I watch a documentary on a set, then I can't sleep. Okay. And Jonathan, do you want to add to that?
I don't think there's a lot to add, really. I think it's kind of been said, and certainly far be it from me to disagree with Poe on this. But yes, monsters do tend to be reflections, don't they, of our worst fears or our nightmares, or very often the worst parts of ourselves. I think there's sometimes a slight danger, in around the sort of literature of this stuff, that you could end up sort of saying, well, people in the past believed in much more kind of literal monsters, but we're much more sophisticated now, and we understand things, and we're scared of different things. I mean, I suspect we're actually scared of the same things as our ancestors were. Very often, the fears are the same. Obviously, I've sort of lived and breathed Dracula for a few years. That Stoker was talking about, and the stuff that people were frightened of at the end of the 19th century. They're the same fears and concerns that have just mutated slightly.
Very much so.
Of today.
Definitely. I mean, especially I was thinking, reading your book recently was, the fear of the immigrant, fear of disease. These could be today, couldn't they? Like literally today. Okay, that's interesting. So feeding on from that, it kind of ties into like what makes a monster a monster.
I think if you don't mind me butting in.
No, I'm kind of doing a rotor, but just obviously saying what comes to mind.
So my money on this one now, and you can prove me wrong, but I think that the monster is essentially otherness incarnate. So the monster, I think, has so many physical forms because it's something that we project away from ourselves. It's something that we project outside ourselves. It's something that's grotesque or that's abject in some way. We're kind of casting it off. And and often it's kind of abhuman. It's like not quite human. It's just kind of removed with a twist. But for my money, I think it's when it veers closest to the human. Just to pick up on Mr. McNee's point, I think that's when monsters get scarier, because I found Westworld absolutely terrifying for that reason, because of the uncanny valley. because the kind of borderline between human and artificial creation becomes
Yeah,
Is there
very
sometimes
removed.
is there sometimes I wonder, picking up on Tracy's point there, whether there's one of the things sort of paradoxically that makes a monster monstrous is a sort of weird attractiveness as well. It's the wrongness of them. Obviously thinking of Dracula and vampires and so on. But Westworld's another great example. There's a kind of weird allure, isn't there, to the monstrosity that we're seeing.
Absolutely.
I think it's kind of an inhumanity, not necessarily physically, but mentally, as in a lack of empathy. And that can go for human monsters as well as the other kind, being merciless and not being able to reason with or connect to them. The kind of the psychopathic element to all monsters is that they don't identify with humanity. They don't care about your feelings or your pain or anything like that, and you are effectively irrelevant or a toy to a monster. And that's a frightening thing. Something without empathy is quite a frightening prospect for most human beings. And at the same time, it's still kind of ideal. I guess there's something attractive about that though as well, because there are certain times we sort of admire people without empathy in a strange sort of way.
Well, we kind of like
the most selfish.
Famous. Yeah, no, you're right. I'm just agreeing with you. Serial killers kind of enjoy a certain, like, a very warped kind of fame, don't they? I watch a lot of these crime documentaries, and it's like they are almost a celebrity in the way they're regarded, but obviously in a very sick, perverted, and like you're saying, they have no empathy. And we're appalled by it to the point where it verges on awe that looks like admiration in a way. It's kind of sick.
The idea as well, I think, isn't it, of just living completely outside the rules of civilized society. There's a dark attractiveness in that, and the serial killer is the exemplar of that tendency, I guess.
Well, this is like as far as you could possibly go, isn't it? So feeding on from that, I mean, what or who is your favorite monster? And have they changed over time, like since maybe childhood to now? Or have you sort of carried a monster with you? Maybe like Dracula, obviously, but in other kind of monsters as well. They're not always embodied in a human form. And what traditional or classic monsters do you see reinvented in modern times due to that? Because we're carrying these monsters with us.
I think that just in terms of the monsters who've been really popularized recently, I think that that zombie has almost been done to death, for example, because it's such a potent kind of symbol of everything from consumerism to kind of politics, etc. But I think that we have these amazing archetypal monsters, and I grew up in a diet of like kind of classic horror, Dracula, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Frankenstein. But for me, the ones that kind of gripped me tended to be, I suppose, more unnameable monsters, like the monster in John Carpenter's The Thing. It kind of because we're and again, it's that thing of it looks like us, it moves like us. Where is it? Or Peter Scribe's Ghost Stories, another good one, where they went to it revealed in her final form as a rather grubby looking little girl, perfect, ordinary. And that for me, I think, is just a wonderful twist on the idea of the monster as something that's strikingly grotesque. Something that's hidden is interesting.
Yeah. And John, do you have a childhood monster?
Well, I sort of watched all the wrong stuff when I was a kid, and I saw the Aliens movies, I think, before I was 10, and that one stuck with me and gave me plenty of nightmares.
That's strange. I was literally just thinking of Aliens. That's so strange. I was literally just thinking of that. Sorry, carry on.
So it's a fascination. Again, it can't be reasoned with, as the famous quote goes, and it's utterly merciless, but it's intelligent and it's beautiful. The aesthetic of it is incredible. So many times through in all these movies and fiction, we're told to keep the monsters to the shadow, because what's hiding in the shadows, whatever your imagination can conceive, is worse than the thing itself. And this
absolutely
this is the exception that proves the rule, I think, because when I think it's so terrifying in light, the alien, the actual H.R. Giger, and yet beautiful and fascinating, and you want to see more of it and study it. Even as it's certain to destroy you in these species.
How is it? Just to cut in there, with because the alien is obviously a perfect example of a monster being modernized, because it has even recently been re-examined and re-explained by the original, well, the filmmaker or creator of Alien. How much do you think that's affected its shock value? Because now we know that it's a man-made creature, whereas before it was an alien.
Yeah, I don't believe any of that. I subscribe to a different school of thought. But I think it's been a major mistake to continue exploring the origins of this creature. It's a fantastic mystery, and it's got,
I would agree,
so much more, even divorced from its origin story or where it came from. It gives the impression of so much more intelligence in its original incarnation. You don't know what's going on in that head, whereas it's since become just a wild animal.
That's it. It's become a lot more bestial,
to its detriment.
That's true. Before there was kind of almost like a sort of different mentality element to the alien, almost psychic. Whereas now it's like, well, you just know it's like literally like a predator. So it's interesting. Okay, just moving on to 4. On that note, I've got this thing here called the Frankenstein experiment. So I want you to imagine that you're given the keys to a secret workshop and access to unlimited dark and mysterious science. It can be any kind of science of your choosing, magic or science. What kind of monster will you make? That's to Tracy again, isn't it? If I lose track, remind me.
I think straight up right now, I'd just put myself in some kind of replicator just so I could go on endless MS Teams and Zoom meetings. Apart from this one's a real nice one. But no, in all seriousness though, I think that I'd reach for the folklore canister, because we've got some amazing folk monsters in Ireland that have never really been translated. Jonathan, as the Dracula scholar, will know well that a lot of Bram Stoker's kind of ideas came from like really old legends about the Jarragon jail, the Red Man. It's an old story in Donegal. But you just down the road, like in the local river, we've got our own monster, Kata, who's this horse-headed monster, and you know. It's never achieved the fame of the Loch Ness Monster, but the sightings have gone from the 15th century to like a couple of years ago, apparently.
Sure.
So I think I would love to kind of recreate these kind of mythical monsters from the past, because I think that they still resonate in the present. So, those kind of stories are everything from cautionary tales, you know.
Yeah.
To
definitely.
kind of fear of otherness.
Yeah, I mean, we have forgotten many. I know when I was researching, there's many myths that you never see them. You know, but when you find them, they've existed. So yeah, I agree with that. And Jonathan, what would you create?
No, interesting question. I think it sort of ties in a little bit with the question you asked before as well. So perhaps I could sort of splice them together like a grotesque, shambling
splice. Splice.
No, I mean, I think there is a sense, isn't there, that I mean, I absolutely see John's point about, you know, the alien, as in the sort of original Ridley Scott film, and the idea that the more you tell us about them and the more they appear, the more kind of diluted they get, and that's certainly true. You know, particularly in that instance, I think there's too much money to be made at this point for them to turn back on that approach. But at the same time, you know, the best monsters do keep coming back and they do keep changing. And it's interesting. I love the idea of this sort of legion of forgotten monsters that can sort of come back together and try to sort of get public attention, as Tracy suggests. But the best of them, you know, like the vampire, you know, keeps on changing, keep coming back. You know, Dracula, every generation has its own Dracula, different take on
yes.
the myth is so kind of malleable, and it can keep shifting and reflecting whatever the current fears are. Monsters in general have cycles. So I mean, zombie, sort of 5 or 10 years ago, I mean, the zombie was the monster, wasn't it? Sort of the age, you know, it seemed to sum everything up. And I mean, now it's looking maybe a little bit played out. Apologies if anyone is planning a zombie book for next year, but no, it feels like we're at the end of the zombie cycle, and there's something else.
Sorry. I felt that what people are feeling now, I felt because I was a huge Romero fan, and when The Walking Dead came, I've watched one episode of The Walking Dead, and my take on that is, why repeat something that you cannot better? You can't improve on that. You're only going to make a weaker source version of it, which is, in my opinion, what it is. So it may have lots of other merits and values, but yeah, I felt maybe that was not a good example of modernizing a monster, because it doesn't add anything to it. In many ways, it detracts. Romero was making a social commentary. Walking Dead doesn't do that. It's literally just a monster show, from what I've seen. Anyway, moving swiftly on before legions of Walking Dead fans attack me.
I would say give it a chance beyond the first episode, perhaps, because it is perhaps up to some similar things. But no, you know, you wonder what's the next monster that's sort of got to come around again. I mean, so I think two things really. Firstly, you know, there seems to be, in terms of where we're living now and everything that's going on, that the sort of Lovecraftian monsters.
Oh yes,
you know, who are these sort of great, unknowable, but you know, slightly contrary kind of forces of nature, feels like a good mirror for where we are now. But personally, in terms of your kind of experimental question, having been, you know, obsessed with the vampire for a little bit, I'm now increasingly intrigued by the Wolfman, because it seems to me there's a myth that has been explored quite a lot, but somehow there's not perhaps a really great, version of the myth in the way in which there is for the vampire or Frankenstein or what have you. So I wonder whether
it's classic,
something to do with the beast within, I guess.
Yeah, I think weirdly, Ginger Snaps, which is a kind of female werewolf movie, probably hits most on the nose and kind of gets the most resonant parallels going there with kind of body monstrosity, puberty, change, and it's also so funny. I love all the kind of double-edged humor.
Yeah, no, I like this. I like that film.
Yeah,
American Werewolf in London is probably the go-to, but it's a comedy, you know, which doesn't really need to be a comedy, but it is a comedy. Okay, so another quote: "A cursed creator, why did you form a monster so hideous that even you turned from me in disgust?" Obviously, I'm quoting the wonderful Mary Shelley from classic Frankenstein novel. And obviously, this is something we were talking about before. This is the thing with Frankenstein, is how the monstrous is inverted. So really, the human is now the monster in Frankenstein, even though he is physically a monster. His observations and perceptions of humanity is presented as monstrous, really. Would you agree with that? And how do you think we are interpreting humans as monsters today in fiction and entertainment? Tracy.
Because you circulated the quote to us, the first reaction reading it was like, oh, sorry about that. Didn't mean to write those. But yeah, I think that there's a weird sense of responsibility, I think, sometimes that comes with writing horror and in creating monsters. And sometimes I'm very aware that, because I tend to work on small scale domestic monsters. So when handling sensitive subjects like domestic abuse, for example, I am very aware that in putting those monsters on the page and kind of putting them out in front of people, they are and can be quite triggering, because I'm interested in monsters that are kind of resurrected from within and that kind of give way to their dark impulses.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that writing monsters as well often has kind of quite political undertones as well, and that's something that's come up throughout our discourse, is that idea that the monster becomes a mirror, and the monster becomes a reflector of the worst parts of society we find around.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And I think that the Dexter novels and the awesome, well, bar for the final season kind of Dexter series, did that really well.
Mm-hmm.
In the idea of the dark passenger within.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Yeah. And John, how do you think?
Well, I think human beings are any time. It doesn't take much to turn someone from a human being into a monster. Even all the classic monsters that we talk about. Vampire is a human that's been turned into a vampire. A werewolf, a human that's been turned into a werewolf. A zombie is a human that's been turned into a zombie. You know, it's all, they all have this human link in their DNA, and it seems like they wouldn't be monstrous without the human element. Interesting you ask the question, though, about creators and what kind of monster you would create. My new book, John McNee's Doom Cabaret, has the opening story is set in a carnival freak show where human beings, audience members, are brought up on stage and transformed through magic and various other machinations into monstrous creatures, and to go on and live the rest of their existence as part of the freak show. If anyone wants to know the kind of monsters that I would create if I had the opportunity, then they should check out my book.
It's all there in your fiction. Yeah, it was very good stuff as well. Very good stuff on the panel. Okay, so what monsters, leading on from that, just staying with you a minute, John, what monsters haven't we seen enough of? Or what monsters do you think might become more popular in this day and age? No, we're talking about werewolves. Can you think of any others?
I'm more interested in exploring new monsters, not just my own, but I think there are modern myths that are really interesting and haven't been explored fully. Slender Man is a wonderful creation, I think, and really terrifying. These kind of creatures that come up in creepypasta and various other places along the internet. And no one, I know there have been books and there's been at least one film, if not dozens, but I don't think anyone's found a way to tell a narrative that properly utilizes a creation like that without giving it an origin, without turning it to twisting it to some prank or some faux fourth wall type thing, but to actually stay true to what's frightening about this uncanny presence.
I saw
and
maybe
make something of that.
Do you know? I'd say a film that kind of would fall into that category was It Follows.
Yes.
Years back, I thought that was a very good handling of an new and unexplained myth, because it doesn't bother to explain anything. And it's quite frightening because of it. But by the end of it, you're like, what the hell is going on? Like, what is this thing? You know? And there's no sequel.
It is frightening.
No franchise. Yeah, it's quite unsettling. Yeah, and
but
Jonathan.
The only problem with it is there's no proper monster design, which is what I really look for from a good monster movie.
Well, yeah, that's true. They are just people. Yeah. And Jonathan, what do you think? What monsters haven't we seen enough of? Or maybe what monsters
I would
much of?
agree with John that there are new monsters sort of coming through the culture, and we were saying earlier that the way in which a good monster kind of reflects back the anxieties of our age, and all the stuff, again, John mentioned, creepypasta and all the stuff on the internet, this sort of barrage of weird sort of misinformation that goes on all the time. I mean, think about, you don't look very far in recent events, you just don't know what to believe. There's so many weird claims, counterclaims, and something that sort of dramatizes that. So yeah, I'd add to Slender Man. I don't know if people know the sort of urban myth of the black-eyed kids.
I think I do know something.
There's a lot of
about
stuff
that.
about this as well, and it's one. I think something we haven't said about often monsters is obviously doesn't apply to Alien, John, but
Mhm.
there's a goofiness. There's sometimes a goofiness to monsters, which weirdly makes them more scary. So yeah, go away and Google the black-eyed kids.
Yeah.
There's something quite funny, but also because of that, slightly disquieting about them as well.
Yes.
Have you heard of gang stalking? Because I was watching this thing about gang stalking is this idea that people are kind of like following you. You know, you bump into someone in the street, or you always think someone's kind of in your space, or, you know, watching you. And there's this whole culture, like online, of people who actually believe that there are, like, you know, operatives who have all this information about you. And I was watching a YouTube video about it, and that's quite creepy. That's quite, you know, because it's in that realm of like, you would never really know. But if you were slightly given to paranoid thought, you know, I thought that could be quite a good basis for a film. You know, someone poo-pooing this
We
idea.
live in very paranoid times, don't we?
Yeah,
So it makes sense that our fears are about paranoia.
that's it. And it's harder to scare people.
And I think that's why Jordan Peele's Get Out worked so magnificently as well.
Oh, it's a great film.
Yeah, because it had all those kind of invasion of the body snatchers type tropes going on, but yet it said something fresh and bold and new about racism and kind of contemporary society.
Yeah.
If I could add a wee monster in there that I'm particularly fond of, is the found footage monster. Because I remember seeing the Blair Witch, and it terrified me because I loved, and also the very first Paranormal Activity, because they dispensed with the kind of cinematic ride that we were accustomed to, with the kind of the ominous music blaring up, etc., and instead kind of turned to these homemade kind of ways where we kind of normally kind of capture images. And I think seeing a monster in those kind of glimpses, fits and starts, or sometimes not at all, is absolutely brilliant. Wreck, the Troll Hunter, the first Cloverfield.
That's great. Yeah.
I know, they're fun. So yeah, more found footage, but good stuff.
I saw Blair Witch, and I remember what I really loved about that film was, before, people maybe don't talk about it a lot, before it came out, there was a whole, almost like a year long of internet kind of build up to it, intrigue, like, is this real? Isn't it? You know, and people were generally questioning, like, is this, like, are they going to release actual footage? So when you came to see the film, you had all this back. And I think maybe younger audiences don't get the same impact from that film.
That's like creepypasta. It's creepypasta before creepypasta, really, because it's something that takes off and you don't know whether it's real or not. Another more recent one would be the Mona Challenge, if you remember that. I think it was the Mona. It was called. It was the face of a girl, and she was smiling, and she had massive eyes.
Yeah, I do know.
Yeah.
And this caught on in the modern day. Everyone thought their children were doing suicide challenges inspired by this thing that came up on their phone, like a modern day satanic panic. And it was just because someone had taken a picture of this Japanese artist's sculpture, and it sort of caught on online. It's a real challenge as a horror author to try and come up with a book that's that captures the imagination like something like that does.
Absolutely, and I was saying that earlier, that I think it's harder to scare people these days because horror is everywhere. You have Trump in the White House, you have a plague ravaging and killing people. Do you see what I mean? So to actually present horror to people as entertainment, it's I think it's a bit more challenging than maybe it has been previously, because it's not so far away anymore. It's like on the doorstep kind of thing. And talking about that and bringing it back to like the modern and society, thinking of the body politic, is the monstrous an I can never say this word, an innate part, we say, of the human condition. Is there something monstrous inside us that we can't other?
I think that's something we've been circling in our discussion so far. But personally, I just find a really interesting conduit for that kind of fascination has become the Netflix docu-series. You know, probably Making a Murderer was the first big kind of
Oh yeah, I love it.
phenomenon. I know.
That's right up my street.
But like, think of how gripped everybody was. I think I pretty much watched the 10 hours straight of it.
Yeah.
And it was that idea of, what was compelling about it was, this is real, you know.
Yeah.
This isn't, you know, something that's just a really interesting narrative and you're watching to see how it plays out. You're actually quite transfixed and thinking, like, what's going to happen here? How is this miscarriage of justice going to be corrected? And I think that in a way they work quite well, because people tune in because we're fascinated by monstrosity. It's us and it's not us all at the same time. And it comes down to it when you really crunch it, like, that's that lure and repulsion factor that we've got going on, that we seem to keep coming back to, that thing of monsters. We want to watch them, we want to read about them.
Yeah, I liked what you said before about it being a mirror, because it's a way of kind of putting what's inside us outside maybe, and then it's easier to examine and it's easier to deal with, rather than saying it's us, you know, and this comes from us, because obviously all monsters are born of the human imagination.
And is there something, I wonder, quite comforting about doing that in a way, that you're able to sort of draw this stuff out, take the elements in ourselves and kind of exorcise them in some way by making them external? You know, and I wonder as well whether the most sort of tenacious monsters in cultural terms are the ones that don't necessarily allow us to do that. So, I mean, you gave us the Frankenstein quote earlier on, a monster so hideous you turn from me in disgust, you know, and that's very clearly, I think, about you know, the fear of being a bad parent, you know, and any parent is frightened of being a bad one, but, you know, in this case, a catastrophically bad parent, the worst parent ever, really. So I wonder whether there's an element of kind of exorcism in the way in which we frame these stories sometimes.
Yeah, I think it feeds maybe back to the same kind of energy that maybe gives us gods. You know, we put these things outside us. So you have the good and the bad. I mean, the devil, Satan, is a monster, right? Or depicted as. So yeah, that is interesting. John, what do you think about that?
I think there's multiple layers of fear to the idea of a monster. There's not only the idea of encountering a monster or being attacked. It's becoming a monster, and we're all only one vampire bite, one werewolf bite, one zombie bite away from becoming a monster, or one bang on the head from becoming a potential serial killer. So
I'll take the vampire bite.
That's a serious, but we're a lot concerned with what we could become given the chance. And given the opportunity, and what we would be capable of if something within us was removed or let loose, and similarly, if what we might create, the fear of our own children. I don't want kids, but, you know, I'm sure other people have this have a constant fear of what they might put out into the world.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I know that one. So what would you say? What is the best defense against monsters? That's to Tracy. Sorry, I'll go around again. So it's difficult because on Zoom you can't see people like as you would on a panel. On a panel, you'd be able to it'd be clear who you're talking to. Yeah, that's the weirdest thing about online teaching as well. It's like nobody knows who you're talking to. Yeah. What's the best defense against monsters, Tracy?
I was thinking about that question there, and I think it's about accepting the monster within in a weird way. I think it's like we're all a little bit monstrous, you know. But Stephen King in Dulce Macabre, he talks about why we love and crave monstrosity, because it's a reaffirmation of the way the world should be, where the monster is outside and we're all good and pure inside. But a really beautiful monster movie of recent years was The Shape of Water. So
Oh yeah, beautiful
where
film.
and it's that idea of the redemption, both of the monster and the girl who loves the monster. So yeah, we have to fall in love with our monsters.
Yeah,
There
no,
you
I
go.
love that film. Yeah, very good. And Jonathan.
Oh, that's such a great answer. I'm not sure how to build on it really. Certainly,
It wouldn't work with Dracula, would it?
to accept. Well, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? Because I mean, so many of these monsters, I think, are connected to repression in some ways. We repress sides of ourselves, and as a result, when they emerge, they're sort of exacerbated and amplified into something monstrous. Certainly, the case with vampires, I think.
Oh yes.
Arguably, serial killers as well. The dream of being free of the rules of society and of decency and all the rest of it. So yes, I mean, I'm sure that the sort of homeopathic approach, I guess, which Tracy suggests is the right one, to allow just a little bit of the monstrous. And certainly what we haven't touched on, as writers, is the old cliche about, the villains being the easiest ones to write, and how hard it is to write the people who are our defense against monsters, the heroes, the good guys, for want of a better phrase. Certainly something Stoker struggles with, I think. You have heroes that are in danger of seeming, insipid up against the sort of, relentless, implacable fantasy evil of the Count.
Yeah, absolutely.
I absolutely have to jump in there, because I think one of the classic Gothic tropes is the unreliable narrator. And if the unreliable narrator is the protagonist who got this kind of dark side, I'm just completely hooked and suckered in. I love it. Sorry, John, but I jumped in front of you there.
No, it's fine.
There's the metaphorical monster, which you could want to sort of embrace, and that would be the best defense against it. But then there's the actual visceral, real, physical monsters, which are the type that I usually write about, and I wouldn't invite any of them into the community. The best defense, I would say, is a united front, which, incidentally, is how they did away with old Dracula. By getting a gang together and taking it on, which is why, as an author, you kind of want to, I think, keep people isolated for as long as possible within your narrative, because to have a united front is effectively to bring your story to a conclusion.
That's true. I'm just thinking then, maybe in modern terms with It, for example, in the movie, they defeat the monster again, which is really just an iteration of Dracula, isn't it? Really thinking of it. The League of Light. Is it the League of Light in Dracula? Yeah. They come together. It's very, very similar idea in It, that they have to kind of stand together, the losers. Yeah.
I don't think, and I think it's a little bit cheating as well, because I don't think they would have. Obviously, it's up to Stephen King to write whatever he wants, but I don't think they could have defeated it. And also, I don't think that they stood a chance against Dracula. I think that was the biggest mistake in the original Dracula, is that Dracula is defeated in the end.
He wasn't.
Against him.
There's often an idea, isn't there, in these? Often an idea in these stories.
It's very well done.
I think King, picks up on that idea. I mean, Salem's Lot is a great monster novel, and it is a version of Dracula, really. But no, I absolutely see the point that up against this sort of ancient Nosferatu or / shape-shifting clown, it's hard to imagine them defeating the monster. But there's often this idea, isn't there, that there's something within the monster itself which is self-defeating in a way.
Yes,
and
evil eats itself.
It's hubris, isn't it, very often?
Yeah.
It's overreaching. And that's certainly true of both Dracula and Pennywise, I think.
That's it. And the empathy, like we were talking about before, and love, the light overcomes the darkness. This idea that light always triumphs, no matter what. So, but then the monsters, obviously, as you know, Jonathan, keep coming back. Yeah. And it's like they're going to keep coming back. It's like that. Okay, so my last question, it's been really, really interesting discussion. I just wanted to finish on looking to the future. And how do you envision monsters evolving? What does the future hold for monsters, either in the visceral term or in the monsters we have within our own ids and personalities? Have I asked for Tracy?
I I think it's a particularly amazing time during the pandemic to start reflecting on what future monsters are going to look like, because I think that our experience, we're like, what, 2.5 months into it now, kind of here in Europe, or slightly outside Europe, sorry lads. But I think that if the zombie hadn't been so thoroughly flogged in the last while, I'd be predicting a bit of a zombie renaissance. But I was wondering if it's going to be like the 60s. You remember all the Marvel superheroes had radiation as their origins? You know, if we're going to see perhaps a crop of supervillains emerging from kind of viruses and medical circumstances, are we going to see a generation shaped by it? But the monsters that I'm actually working very closely at the moment. I've been supervising artist Siobhan Gibbons' PhD at the moment, and she spent 5 years collaborating with science fiction writer Mabel Lynn, and together they've created this utopian hybrid monster race called the Xenothorpians. But they're actually based on residency. She spent a lot of time working in scientific labs on residencies. So her research is so well informed by kind of using and blending kind of existing DNA from jellyfish and zebrafish and sea squirt. So she's created this race of imaginary beings who live in this kind of new utopian reality. And honestly, it's been so heartwarming kind of working with this over the last while, because I think we need more utopian monsters. There you go.
Yeah, good answer. And Jonathan?
Right, well, I'm fascinated by the idea of a utopian monster. It's like a really kind of intriguing contradiction in terms, I guess. Yeah, I mean, as for your question, James, yeah, I mean, monsters are going to keep coming back, and there's no killing them, and they're going to keep on mutating and evolving and reflecting our own worst fears back at us. As to what that holds for the future, I don't know. I know for myself that I'm working on another novel after the Dracula book, which I think you mentioned is out now, James. Actually, it's not, sadly. It's not out until much later in the year, September now.
Which one? Dracula's Child?
Book is out in September.
Oh, I'm sorry, because I read online that it was out now. I'm sorry. Yeah.
It was wishful thinking. It was supposed to be out now, but due to the monstrous times that we're in, it's been put back to September.
Yeah, I understand that. Well, people, readers have got a treat in store then. I can say that.
You're a very kind man, thank you.
Well, I read a lot of vampire fiction, and yeah, it's very good. Yeah, sorry, carry on.
Thank you. No, I mean, I'm working on another 19th century sequel, not Dracula or vampire related, but it does have a monstrous element. I guess beyond that, as I said earlier, I mean, I think we haven't touched on as much is the sort of Lovecraftian monster, and it feels now in these pandemic times there is something doesn't have a face, doesn't have a personality, and it's completely disrupted the world. It's completely uncaring. I mean, it's not even it's not something that lives outside society's rules. It doesn't have any morality at all. It's completely ignored. And whether that will be the thing.
Yeah, I'd like to see more. I mean, I don't know if you saw The Colour Out of Space.
Not yet.
That was quite a good, I won't ruin it obviously, but I thought that was quite a good attempt, I'd say, at Lovecraftian, presenting that kind of epic horror vision. It worked quite well. And John, what's your take? What do you think monsters coming for us in the future?
Well, I'm all for that, the cosmic horror. I mean, we've spent a good couple of decades sort of taking the edges off most of our monsters, trying to put a human face back on them, giving our vampires souls and having werewolves that are only turn into werewolves when they want to. And the only one that's sort of left is still as intact as the zombie, really, which no one has any compunction about killing. So it's sort of not particularly not that interesting. I would like our monsters to get their teeth back and to start behaving in unnoble ways, and to have their own agendas that go far beyond just torturing or eating or feeding on humans. I want them to start setting their sights a bit higher and becoming more, even tougher to defeat than the ones that we know.
I love that at the moment. In what I'm writing is to try and write something that is essentially villainless. It's really just people's point of view, and like you're saying, their agenda, what they want, and the conflict of agendas creates the monstrous, rather than someone saying, I want to rule the world, kind of thing.
Yes. Another of my favorite monsters are the Cenobites, of course,
Brilliant.
who work entirely. They're not feeding. They're working entirely to their own games and their own interests. And they're not even the villains of their own story. Those kind of monsters are more just as horrifying, just as malevolent and lacking in empathy, and just as dangerous, but working to a different agenda. Something a bit more interesting, I would like to see.
Excellent. Intelligent monsters of the future. That would be good, because obviously the inverse of that is we have what's very scary for me in the world today is we have a great deal of ignorance. You only have to go on the internet to see. Never in my life have I seen such entitled and empowered ignorance at large. Very scary. We talk about zombies, but obviously we're surrounded by them. So does anyone have anything else they want to add to the panel, or any ideas that didn't get maybe covered or discussed, just before we go off to fight monsters again or become them? No, Tracy?
No, I just want to thank you, James, for sharing. It's been a really interesting discussion.
No, my pleasure. It's been great to have you all on. Thank you very much. To you, Tracy, thank you for coming on and being so interesting and enlightening. And obviously, J.S. Barnes with Jonathan as well, thank you. And John McNee. All brilliant writers. Everyone should definitely go check out their work. They love anything about monsters and in modern times as well. So great, guys. It's been fantastic to have you. Keep writing.
Thank you.
Thank you.